All right, folks. This is Dennis Wynn here again. We think we have the glitches corrected. So, Dorian, if you would say hi.
Hello, everyone.
All right. Anybody out there still that can tell me, do we have Dorian online with us now? All right. And string and can don't work. Okay, we still don't have Dorian. Is that correct? George Kinsey, Bill from Ohio, Scotty, anybody? I am not seeing anything.
Huh. Can they hear you?
Yes, they can hear me. I don't know why, but now, see, they're not hearing me now either.
Huh.
All right, we got a message here. Let's see. Mike says that we can hear him. Let me ask him. All right, y'all, stand by 1 second here. Y'all can hear him. Let's see if you can hear me now. Dorian, ask him if they're hearing me.
Okay. We need to know if everyone is hearing Dennis also. Can you hear Dennis as well as myself?
I just got a message. They can hear both of us. So, welcome back, y'all. Again, I apologize for the glitch here. It was probably on my end, but we'll start again. Welcome back to the show here. So, Dorian, without further ado, why don't you just kick it off and let's get to talking.
Okay. All right. Well, hello to everybody that's come back for another dose of Quantrill and his Raiders. I don't think you're going to be disappointed in what we're going to do tonight and what we're going to cover. There is nothing like this part of the Civil War, as I'm sure you're starting to see already through the first two parts. But I want to remind you, just a quick moment of review. If you'll go to the supplemental pictures and pull up picture number 1, it is a combined picture of two of Quantrill's men, Dave Poole and John Jarrett. Take a look again. You can see 4 pistols in the possession of each man. And they actually were carrying 6, counting the ones that they have hidden away. And possibly a boot pistol or 2 on top of that. But they were carrying 6 revolvers. So I call your attention to this before we begin the story tonight, because I want you to remember, in the battles we're going to be talking about, in the incredible shootouts, these men had a lot of firepower. That was unheard of back in that day.
Yes, it was.
I mean, for a guy to be able to fire 36 shots without reloading, and this is early in the war. You know, we're just barely into the late winter, early spring of 1862, where we're going to pick it up. And the federal troops that Quantrill and his men are facing are mostly equipped with single-shot carbines. So, you know, they've got to the fire shot, they've got to open the breech, they've got to stick in another cartridge, and I'm not sure what these men were equipped with. Have not researched that deep. I'm sure it is possible to discover what weapons they were using. But at that time, most of the cartridges would have been paper or linen cartridges. If you're not sure what those cartridges look like, you can Google Civil War carbine cartridges, and you'll get a lot of pictures of what the different cartridges look like. You can bring up a picture and click on the link that comes with the picture, and it will take you, and usually you'll get a site that will talk about the particular gun that fired that cartridge. As the war continued on, certainly brass cartridges began to be much more prevalent, and by the end of the war, of course, they were you had your 18 or 17 shot Henry rifles and your 7-shot Spencers were in use by the middle of the war, and that would have made a difference in firepower. It would have cut the edge that the raw edge statistically that the guerrillas had in firepower, but the problem was it didn't cut the edge they had in terms of how they fought. And I want to get you through these early fights, and I want you to understand, I want you to watch them develop into what I think very, very strongly was the world's most incredible or powerful cavalry force that ever existed. Because, we haven't got really into the way they fought yet. They're still learning. And that's, kind of what we're going to take up with tonight as we get into the next chapter. This is the 5th chapter in our book on Quantrill that was written by Captain Harrison Trow. And this one's entitled The Jayhawkers and the Militia Murder Old Man Blythe's Son. And there's another interesting insight that we get from this chapter. Here we are. These guys are basically grown men. We know some of them are young, 18, 20, 21. We already know that they're motivated by revenge, that they've had either, loved ones either murdered or greatly insulted. They've had wives that were raped by basically the federal guerrillas that called themselves Jayhawkers and Redlegs. So they already have that revenge motive, and we understand that. But this chapter is going to show us how the war affected this kind of war, this part of the Civil War, how it affected children, young boys, just coming into puberty, so to speak, 10, 11, 12 years old, and amazingly to see that even at that age, how, what they could do in terms of resisting the people that they thought were their enemies. So we're going to meet a very incredible young man here, and sadly, his life is going to come to an end all too soon, but he's going to, as it were, clothe himself with glory as he goes out, so to speak. So let's go ahead and pick it up here in chapter 5. And it says that, now you remember that Quantrill and his men, and I didn't express it this way, but they got a little overconfident. They'd had some successes against the Federals, and they dropped their guard, and twice they got trapped in houses, and one time almost got burned up, and both times we saw how they made desperate escapes. Now, Dennis, you've been around, you were a fireman, and you were in emergency situations more than most of us could ever even think about.
Yeah.
more than we could watch on television.
Yeah.
But imagine, you had runs that were routine. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was hurt. The garage caught fire. You got it out in 15 minutes or something.
Yep.
And things like that. You weren't stressed out. Your nerves weren't on edge to the max on every call out that you went on the fire department, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, this wasn't the case with these guys. Imagine if let's say day after day, Dennis, you and your company were called out on a 4-alarm fire that involved a 7 or 8 story building, and that there were known to be dozens of people trapped inside. And when you got there, the flames were coming through the roof and the black smoke was pouring up. Can you imagine facing that every single day?
No, it would be incredible and impossible to withstand.
Right.
Just something
Sure.
I can add in the
Please do.
In the 30 years that I was in the fire service, I was trapped inside 3 times, and your mind is absolutely just spot on, completely focused on making it out alive. And I lost two friends during my career. Same fire killed both of them, and
Oh,
it was a horrible story. I won't go into it now, but having been trapped, when you mentioned before about Quantrill and his men being inside a building that was on fire, the desperation and determination that they showed and courage to get out of that and come out fighting as opposed to cowering and being consumed by flames it really speaks to me as a professional firefighter, because I've been there and I know what happens, and it scares the bejesus out of you at the time, you know.
right,
So,
right. It's one thing to be scared, though, and another thing to panic, right?
oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, you want to get out of there, and having been burned, I understand the pain and the horrific things that go with that. But those guys, when they came out of that house or in barn, I believe was the other one, but regardless, when they came out, pistols blazing, they put up a big wall of fire and got out, intact.
Right,
Amazing.
right. Well, they had gotten themselves into that situation because they got careless in posting their guard. They assumed they were more secure than they were. And so they're getting a lesson in the life of a guerrilla.
Yeah.
If you're going to survive, you never assume you're safe. You never assume you're secure. You see?
Yep.
So they're going to get into trouble again. They're just about to get into it here. They haven't quite learned the lesson yet, but they are learning. So I want you to get a sense, I want our audience to get a sense of how they're developing into these incredible warriors I keep talking about. Now, I know when I first started, and I said these guys were carrying 6 pistols apiece, I'm sure there were some out there that kind of chuckled and said, "Well, I wonder what brand of hooch he's been drinking." Must be out of a galvanized tub. And then when you see those pictures of those two guys with pistols everywhere, it really brings home the lesson. These guys were armed to the teeth in a way that no other Civil War soldiers were. I mean, you can look at hundreds of pictures of Civil War soldiers, rebel soldiers in uniforms, and a lot of them posed with a pistol in one hand and a Bowie knife in the other, and occasionally you'll find a picture where they've got maybe 2 pistols. But you're not going to see pictures like Dave Poole and John Jarrett that we just looked at here a few minutes ago among the regular Army. So that right there tells you we're dealing with a whole different situation in the Civil War. Now, let's get into this story about Old Man Blythe's son here. So they were on foot after their second close brush with death, and they were in Jackson County, and it was filled with troops. Kansas City had a large garrison, and there were smaller ones at Independence. Now, if you'll look in the pictures, picture number 2, this is all I could find, basically, that refers to Pink Hill. There was a garrison at Pink Hill, Missouri at that time, but apparently Pink Hill has been absorbed into what is now called Blue Springs, and I did not have time to, detail research everything. Someone wants to do that, they can. But I did find the Pink Hill Park, so I knew I was getting close to where this little town with the garrison was. There were also garrisons at Lone Jack, and if you look at the next picture, picture number 3, this is Lone Jack, Missouri. This is downtown right not too long after the Civil War. And I want you to go to picture number 4. This is the area around Lone Jack, and this depicts one of the battles that was fought there. And what I really like about this picture, you see the little farmhouses, and you get a feel for the Missouri countryside and the style of life that people had in the country around there. Those are not the southern mansions of rich people. Those are poor people's houses. Some of them might be lower middle class, maybe a few upper middle class, but this is not the place of the rich. Okay, now let's go on into our story here. So there were garrisons: Pink Hill, Lone Jack, Stony Point. I could find nothing on Stony Point other than a Stony Point subdivision. And there was a little town called Sibley. And let's see, did I come up with something on Sibley? I thought I did. Oh, yeah, I did. Sure did. But we don't want to skip picture 5. Picture 5 I threw in there to show this is the kind of thing, what you see in the picture. You see the home burning in the background. You see the man hanging from the tree. This is what fueled so many of the Civil War warriors and fighters in Missouri and Kansas with revenge. Revenge was a far greater factor among these soldiers than anywhere else in the whole Civil War theater, in any of the other states. The rebels were focused on, we want to get these invaders out of our territory. They weren't really fighting for revenge. They were fighting because they had a sense of outrage that they'd been invaded. That's the way they looked at it. And the Yankees were saying, well, we're invading because you're trying to leave the Union, and we're not going to let you. But see, it wasn't revenge. The Yankees' motive was to force them to come back into the Union. But here in Missouri and Kansas, forget all of that. You know, they made a big deal over pro-slavery, anti-slavery, but it really kept, as this fire cooked, it really boiled down to revenge was motivating both sides. As Quantrill's total of dead Yankee soldiers just kept jumping by leaps and bounds, there was a revenge factor that came into even the regular militia troops, not just the Jayhawkers and the Redlegs. The regular Yankee soldiers, they lost a lot of buddies. They saw their buddies shot down by the dozens, and revenge began, a desire for revenge against Quantrill, to stop him, to bring him to justice once and for all, to hang him or kill him. It was motivated by revenge in these men. So, with that in mind, let's go to photo number 6. This is a picture of the restored Fort Osage at Sibley. Sibley was just mentioned in our book as having a federal garrison there. And you see in picture 6, you see the outside, what it looks like from the outside. And you see what it looks like from the inside in picture 7. Now, this fort was established in 1827, so it's got quite a history. Be a great place to metal detect around, I'm sure, if you could do it. All right, now let's get back into our story. Remember, there was a Union commander that Trill refers to. You know, they just commonly referred to each other by their last names instead of their ranks. They didn't say General Peabody or Colonel Peabody, but just Peabody caused the report. And if you remember, he came into the story in part 2. But Peabody caused a report to be circulated that a majority of Quantrill's men were wounded, and that if the brush were scoured thoroughly, they might be picked up here and there and summarily disposed of. So raiding bands, therefore, began the hunt. Old men were imprisoned because they could give no information of a concealed enemy. All right, now let's focus on that a second. Old men were imprisoned because they could give no information of a concealed enemy. Well, see, that is actually probably the least painful of all the things that were inflicted on old men for not giving information, for not betraying the guerrillas. Now, a lot of the old men didn't have any information. They weren't plugged into the underground news, so to speak. And the Yankees couldn't be sure if they were holding out on them or if they really didn't know. And so they got imprisoned, they got tortured. But it says that, in addition, young men were murdered outright. Women were insulted and abused. The word insulted is a typical Southern polite term for the more brutal word of rape. Women were raped and beaten, is what he's saying here. The uneasiness that had heretofore, that is, before this point, rested upon the county, talking about Jackson County, gave place to a feeling of positive fear. Can you imagine? Can you see the evolution of this? Mm-hmm. Think about this, Dennis. If you had to worry, if you had to go home tonight, or you probably are home, but imagine if you had to worry, if you couldn't be sure that a group of men dressed in military uniforms would show up in the middle of the night and drag you and your wife out of your beds and torch your house and maybe, insult your wife and beat you till you're almost dead, or maybe just string you up to a tree, the closest tree. Don't know if you got any big trees in your yard.
One or two. But
yeah, you might want to.
And that's a good point.
You might want to cut those down. Just
I might. You're right.
But imagine living in fear of this tonight, tomorrow night, next week, and next month, and next year. Imagine have to continue your life under these conditions, and that's what these people